PCG, you happy to continue?
Yes, Your Honour.
All right, thanks. Yes, when you're ready.
Can I read it on the screen?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. At trial, my father denied all charges against him. It took 6 years and 3 trials before he was finally convicted for the indecent assault of me. The elders who presided over the committee meetings and the appeal committee meetings gave evidence at the committal and at voir dire during the first trial, but the trial resulted in a hung jury. The second trial was declared a mistrial. My father was convicted at the third trial at the end of 2004. He was sentenced to 3 years imprisonment. The trials were easy compared to what I had been through with the elders during the committee meetings. I would go through it 20 more times if I had to. At least the court has rules when questioning survivor witnesses. The Jehovah's Witnesses can do and insinuate whatever they want, and there are no protections for the victims at all. I've had no contact with any of the elders involved in the committee meetings or from the Mariba congregation or from the Watchtower since my father was convicted. During my teens, I was at times depressed and suicidal, and this became worse after my father's sexual abuse of me while my mother was away at Expo 88. I also attempted suicide several months after the committee meetings in 1989 as a result of my experience of the committee meetings with the elders. And I couldn't bear the judgment of those around me, the public vilification and ostracism. I wanted to dig a hole and die. My relationship with my mother is now strained but civil. This is because I still hold her partly responsible for the abuse of my sisters and me. To this day, I have never felt I had her full support or protection. The only time I felt my upset feelings were heard was when I went to the police. Nobody else, up until that point, had acknowledged that what my father did to me was wrong and he should be made to answer for it. I have at times lived a life in fear of being ostracised, shunned and vilified by those around me. I have always lived in fear of my father. I have lived in fear of Jehovah. I thought I had done all the right things. I had put my trust in Jehovah, but nobody protected me. They only made it worse. During the criminal trials, I felt as though all my nightmares had gathered together in the one place, and I was terrified that Jehovah would kill me for having reported it to the police and for bringing reproach upon his name. I now have 4 children, of whom I'm fiercely protective. When I separated from my partner last year, I felt like I didn't belong anywhere and didn't really have a name that wasn't associated with an unhappy past. I talked to my eldest son about it, and he suggested that he make up a name for me. He did this, redacted, and made up my current surname. Jehovah's Witness elders sit in judgment of congregation members in relation to matters of wrongdoing. In my experience is that when a person reports wrongdoing, the elders judge that person's credibility as a witness by reference to his or her position in the congregation, their age, their sex, and their outward displays of spirituality. In assessing spirituality, the elders will take into consideration how frequently a person attends and offers answers at congregation meetings, how well they know the Bible, how they are treated by their family and their family's reputation within the congregation, how often they go out preaching, and how submissive they are to the elders. I had reported my father's abuse to the elders because that is what I believed I was supposed to do in accordance with Jehovah's expectations. I thought that Jehovah and the elders would protect me and my sisters. Instead, I felt that rather than protect me as a victim, the elders primarily sat in judgment of me and my credibility as a witness. The elders refused to speak to my younger sisters because of their ages at the time, and they did not even entertain consideration of their credibility as to witness their own abuse. Even when a victim is assessed by the elders as a credible witness, if an alleged abuser denies the allegation, then the elders will only believe the victim's testimony if there are 2 or 3 credible witnesses to the same incident of abuse. That's in Deuteronomy 19:15 and John 8:17. Although they receive reports and investigate wrongdoing and then make assessments as to a witness's credibility, it is my understanding that elders have no training in interviewing, techniques, counselling, or psychology. Elders interview and interrogate child victims of sexual abuse, and in my experience, cause more damage to the victim. In my case, the elders who were friends of my father interrogated me, offered me no emotional support or protection, and made me feel as though I was insulting them and that I was to blame. The Jehovah's Witnesses believe that they should not take one another to court. They use a scripture in 1 Corinthians 6:1-8. I understand that this includes reporting child sexual abuse to the police. I was told and believed that to take such matters outside the church would bring reproach upon Jehovah's name. Child sexual abuse is a crime. The church and the elders have no right to interfere with, prevent, or threaten victims of abuse if they choose to report their abuse to the police. I felt unable to report my father to the police when the events were fresh in my mind and in the minds of others who were or could have been witnesses. If I hadn't been so scared of reporting to the police, I don't think I would have been subjected to such a drawn-out criminal process in which I had to relive the abuse and the subsequent interrogation by the elders over and over again. I feel that children in Jehovah's Witness Church are vulnerable and will continue to be easy targets. This is because, in my experience, the church's current beliefs and practices, such as a rule requiring 2 witnesses to the same event, the practice of dealing with allegations privately and within the church, and the factors that are taken into consideration by elders when determining whether to reinstate a person against whom an allegation of child sexual abuse has been made, appear to favour and even protect pedophiles. I think it is paramount that uniform mandatory reporting laws are introduced across Australia to apply to institutions like Jehovah's Witnesses Church in order to protect children. I believe that making the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society and the church financially accountable is essential for the protection of children and to redress the suffering of past, present and future victims of child sexual abuse within the church. I hope that my traumatic experience of abuse and of the Jehovah's Witness Church beliefs, practices, and processes can be used in a positive way. I have come forward today because I want to advocate for all victims who have been sexually assaulted within the Jehovah's Witness Church. I know so many victims of sexual abuse within the church whose fear of repercussion prevents them from coming forward. I would like to promote change and set a precedent by exposing the way my case of sexual abuse was handled and encouraging other victims to speak out.
Thank you, BCG. I just have a few questions to ask to clarify some aspects of your statement, or to ask you to expand on them. Firstly, you deal in your statement with what happens when someone is disfellowshipped from or disassociates from the church, and you describe them as being shunned and ostracized. Do you have experience of people who were disfellowshipped and how they were treated?
Yes, I remember there was a young girl in the congregation who was shunned and ostracised. I remember she got a tattoo, so that was bad, and associated with worldly people.
And what was your experience of the position of family members? In other words, were family members in the congregation also expected to shun or ostracize disfellowshipped or disassociated family members?
Yes, they were. They wouldn't even speak to them.
Did you have experience of that?
For me personally?
No, I mean
Of
people that you knew and you saw this happening.
Oh yes, definitely.
And could disfellowship people still attend meetings of the congregation?
They could attend meetings, but there were rules about where they sat and what time they entered the Kingdom Hall and what time they left the Kingdom Hall.
What were those rules?
I think they had to sit down the back of the Kingdom Hall and not speak to anyone. They couldn't enter the Kingdom Hall until the meeting had already started, and they had to leave prior to the meeting finishing.
You say in your statement that once you left the church, you and your children were completely shunned, ostracized, and actively avoided by members of the congregation. In what way was this done? Can you give any real examples?
Yeah. Well, my family, particularly my oldest sister, wouldn't speak to me anymore. Also, when taking my children to school, there were Jehovah's Witness mothers there with their children, and they used to grab their children away from me and walk around me. So, yeah.
You say in your statement that the police were scary as they were considered to be very bad people. Where did you get this idea from?
I got that idea from the Jehovah's Witness practices and beliefs in a way that they used to liken worldly people in a derogatory sense as like the people in Sodom and Gomorrah. Bad people, not to be trusted.
So what was your experience of how people in the church regarded secular authorities?
It was like they didn't matter. The laws and standards outside the Jehovah's Witness Church didn't matter because they seemed to think that they were the ultimate authority. So that's why nobody's encouraged to report to the police. It should always be dealt with them because, in my belief, they appear to have higher standards and they think they have higher standards than the law.
Does that have to do with being in the world but not of the world?
How do you mean?
Well, if if I recall, I may be wrong, that's something you mentioned to me, but if that's not familiar to you or you don't have an explanation of that.
Well, they would say that associating with worldly people would, you know, spoil their good name, beliefs, and maybe they might be influenced by the other people's beliefs, the worldly people's beliefs, I suppose.
And you say in your statement that Ron DeRoy, who was the presiding overseer, quoted scripture which says that Jehovah's Witnesses don't take brothers to court, and then you later in your statement you record that scripture as being in 1 Corinthians. Do you remember that?
Yes.
If one looks at that scripture, it might be understood as referring to just civil claims between people as opposed to criminal complaints. How did you understand it?
No, it was a blanket rule. There was no distinction between civil claims and criminal. And I believe that's what my mother thought as well.
And how did you come to that understanding?
It was just with my mother, or the belief that I had.
The understanding that the prescription about not taking matters to court included not taking criminal matters to court. Particularly because there was no distinction. So if there was a wrongdoing in the congregation, you're always told that you had to tell the elders. The legal authorities never even came into the picture. They would often say from the platform and their talks that you shouldn't take a brother to court. So that meant everything. And you say also in your statement that you were taught there was a responsibility to report wrongdoing to the elders within the congregation. What sort of wrongdoing, in your understanding, was required to be reported?
Smoking. Smoking, things you could be disfellowshipped for, lying, getting a tattoo, over drinking, doing drugs, I suppose, and sexual relations with another person you're not married to, homosexuality. Can't think of any more.
And what
lying. Yep.
And did you have experience as to what the elders did with such reports?
Yeah, I knew that if they looked at that sometimes, and the person wasn't repentant or whatever, they'd disfellowship them. They'd use so all the members of the congregation were mandated to do that. It was like little spies everywhere.
So if the wrongdoing was serious enough and there wasn't sufficient or adequate repentance, then there would be disfellowshipping.
Yes.
When you wrote to the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, essentially complaining about the reinstatement of your father, do you remember that?
Yes.
So your letter's at tab 29. Perhaps we can have it up on the screen. So that's the covering letter. It's being forwarded on by Ron DeRoy, and then starting the next page is your letter. You recognise that letter?
Yes.
And then you received a reply, which is at tab 30. And you mentioned that reply in your statement. Mm-hmm. How did you respond to that reply, to receiving that reply?
little bit insulted, I suppose, and I felt like it was a token gesture, particularly where I was counselled to preserve tears in a skin bottle.
Did you feel comforted by that?
Not at all.
And did you know which individual or individuals were behind this letter, who wrote it?
No.
You'll see at the top of the letter, if we can just scroll down a bit. There's a reference there, SD:SSB. Did you know what that represented?
No.
Whether that was a particular individual?
No.
Did it concern you at all that the letter was apparently written anonymously?
I didn't really probably think about that. Given my knowledge of things that were outside the church then, I just saw the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society and figured it was them, their organisation.
Those are my questions, Your Honour.
Does anyone else have any questions?
Yes, Your Honour.
Anyone else? Who should go first?
Probably me in this occasion.
That's right.
Thank you. PCG, my name is Coyne. I'm representing Dino Ali, Kevin Baldich, Rhonda Roy, and Alan Penchef, and some other people that you don't know. So, I just want to ask you only a couple of questions, but you made your complaint to the elders around June 1989. Is that right?
I don't recall exactly when I made it.
My friend will correct me if I've got that wrong. But after you made your complaint to the elders, did they arrange alternate accommodation for you in the congregation?
Initially, I stayed at home with my mother. My father came back she'd invite him in and come back and knock me around.
Yes.
Then once the committee meetings had finished, my sister was counselled and she decided to move back into our house. And I was pretty badly treated by her and my mother at that stage. Even to the point where I couldn't access my bedroom. I'd have to get in through an outside window. And then I remember going to Kevin Bowditch in the walkway of the Kingdom Hall, and I said to him, I can't live here anymore. I don't want to be in the house of my mother.
And they arranged accommodation for you within the congregation, is that right?
Kevin Bowditch arranged for me to stay with Kerry and Mark Grigor. I didn't really know them very well, and I stayed at their house for a while, helped them look after their children. And
you were then married around November 1989.
Yes, that's correct.
At the time of your marriage, you were living with the Bowditch family?
Yes.
How long did you live with the Bowditch family?
I don't remember the exact time, but I know that I'd stayed there just before I got married.
Yes. And the Bowditch family assisted you with planning for the wedding?
Planning as in?
Paying?
No, they did not pay for it.
Just the general planning for the wedding in relation to the ceremony?
Yeah, I remember Lynn Bowditch made my little sister's... I bought the fabric and she said she would make their little flower girl dresses.
Yes. And did Kevin Bowditch give you away at your wedding?
Yes, he did. I asked him to.
Okay. After you were married, you moved to Townsville. Is that right?
Are you talking about a particular time? Yeah, I did move to Townsville, yeah.
shortly after that?
Oh, no. I had 2 children first and then I moved to
Then you
Townsville.
moved to Townsville. When you were in Townsville, were you still with the Jehovah's Witness faith?
Yes.
Did Rhonda Roy and his family come and stay with you a number of times whilst you were up there?
No, I don't recall him staying. I do remember a photo with them, so they must have visited at one point. But I don't recall him staying with us.
Just to be more specific, during the conventions that were held in Townsville, did they ever stay with you during that?
I can't recall, to be honest. Living in Cairns, he'd left the family home somewhere in Cairns, yeah.
And was he returning during that period of time to your family home?
Yes.
And can you just give a brief explanation of what was going on at that time between your parents?
My parents were separating, and my father had wanted to leave my mother for another woman in the congregation that was married, and he was matching up my older sister with the woman's husband.
But he was coming home to your place during that, regularly,
yes.
And you were there.
Yes.
And that was during that committee process and around that period of time.
Yes.
So at that stage, you were having to deal with him outside the committee process in your own home.
Yes.
Just would you consider yourself to be a devout at that time that you were abused? Do you consider yourself to have been a devout Jehovah's Witness?
Oh, yes, very.
So the beliefs were very strong beliefs that you held?
Yes.
And throughout the whole period of time that you were a Jehovah's Witness, you felt very strong in your commitment to Jehovah?
Yes, certainly, yes.
Are you able to just assist, perhaps to explain in your own words some of the terms that you've used in the course of your statement? One is a term you've used on a number of occasions, reproach on Jehovah's name. Could you please explain to the Commission, what does reproach on Jehovah's name mean?
It would mean talking or telling anybody that was classified as, or anybody outside the church, about negative things that happened within the congregation, meetings, or with my father, for example. Even, couldn't disclose that. We were pretty much counselled from the platform to keep things within the organisation.
So if you did, if I could say do that, a reproach on Jehovah's name, what did you think the outcome would be? Or what would happen to you?
That not only would you get into trouble by the elders and the congregation disfellowshipped, Jehovah would kill you, definitely.
So when you say Jehovah would kill you, what do you mean? What is your understanding of what would happen? What was your understanding at that time sorry, I'll withdraw that. What was your belief at that time about Jehovah killing you?
Well, the Jehovah's Witnesses' foundational belief was that Armageddon was coming, and it was so close that, people weren't encouraged to pursue careers, buy houses, anything like that, that they should devote all their time to preaching. So in that sense, it was like it was going to happen in the next year, that Armageddon was going to come, and it was like Judgment Day, and you'd be killed if you weren't in the Jehovah's Witness church.
So you wouldn't be saved as, as along with the other Jehovah's Witnesses?
No, yes.
And was that a powerful belief?
Oh, yes.
And just in relation to that, if you were defellowshipped, what do you think Jehovah would do to you?
It'd kill you.
So it's the same sort of process?
Same thing, yes.
During the time that you were in the committee, at the committee hearings, I just want to go back to your statement. You missed a line in your statement, but it was the case, wasn't it, that during that committee meeting, your father was brought into the room?
Yes.
And he was at one of those meetings and sat at the end of the other end of the table?
Yes.
How did you feel sitting in that room with the three elders and your father?
I felt extremely uncomfortable talking to the men that were his friends. He's, being his age. And I remember, I have never been in my entire life so petrified and scared of my father and his threats and the process.
And what was it that made you talked about your father's threats, but was there anything else that made you feel threatened or petrified?
He was stalking me, and he had that ability to follow through with his threats.
When you were coming back to the committee meeting, when you were in the room, what can you say to the Commission about the tone of the questioning to you?
The tone of the questioning from the elders was almost accusatory, in the sense that, that I was to blame for what happened, or whether I enjoyed it, or it was my fault. And it was almost like they were insulted that I would even speak against my father, who was a brother anointed by a Holy Spirit. And I also felt like they were taking delight, I suppose, in asking the same questions over and over again. I had all different people asking me questions, and my father could say whatever he liked to me. It was very threatening, very scary.
What did you think that they were doing by asking you questions over and over again?
I felt like they were trying to test me, to see if I was lying, whether there were any inconsistencies in my story. And I also felt like I was reliving it all, and they were having fun with that.
When you said in your statement, or you deleted a line from your statement earlier today about having gone to a psychologist, a worldly psychologist. First, I just want to ask you about what your understanding is of a worldly person. What was the idea in your mind about what a worldly person was?
My belief was probably based on the way the Jehovah's Witnesses spoke about worldly people. I actually now think it's quite a derogatory term, and they use it in a derogatory sense, like the worldly people don't have any morals. They're lower than the Jehovah's Witnesses because they seem to hold themselves up having the high moral ground in every part of their lives.
During that period of, say, 1988 and 1989, did you have any friends other than in the Jehovah's Witness congregation?
No.
You went to school, but did you ever associate with any of those, people that you went to school with outside of school?
Never allowed to associate with them outside.
Were you allowed to engage in extracurricular activities at the school?
Definitely not.
And the sex education, that was not permitted?
Yeah, definitely not.
And that was, and how was that? That was done, wasn't it, by way of a note that was sent to the school that you not participate in certain classes?
My parents were directed by the publications, elders, meetings, to write to the school and write a note that we couldn't participate in sex education classes, birthdays, Christmas, Easter.
At the time, so outside of the Jehovah's Witness congregation, was there anybody that you believed that you could go and talk to?
No.
In terms of seeing seeing any counsellor or psychologist or psychiatrist, when was you have seen a psychologist?
Yes.
When was the first time you went to see or had any engagement with a psychologist?
It wouldn't have been long after I got married, and it was when I had attempted suicide, took an overdose, and I was put into hospital.
And how was...
A psychologist came in then to talk to me, but he was a male, so I wouldn't speak to him.
So you didn't have any counselling at that stage?
No.
When did you or did you ultimately get some counselling?
I eventually, the feelings of suicide just kept getting, they're always there. And given that I had a little son to look after, even though that was a positive for me, it was very hard to fight those feelings, and my nightmares were pretty bad. Sleep, and I went to go see a doctor.
And when was that?
That would have been after my first son was born, probably about a year and a half. And I think she prescribed me some medication because I didn't want to talk to any males.
When your father came back into the Mariba congregation, you continued to live there for some years after that.
Yes.
And how did you feel having him in the congregation?
I don't think he came back to live, but he came back when not long after his reinstatement was announced, and I remember him coming to the Kingdom Hall, and I could hear all the brothers and sisters coming up because he was standing quite close to me to, I felt, intimidate me. I was very scared, shaking, and I remember all the brothers and sisters that knew what he'd done shaking his hand and saying, "Congratulations, welcome back, good on you." And I just felt pretty worthless because he didn't even apologise.
Did you feel? Did you ever receive an apology from your father?
No.
Did you ever receive? Or You've read some of these statements of some of the elders that were involved in the committee meetings, and
Yes.
they have spoken about having provided support to you. What can you say about that?
I am actually probably really insulted that all this time, they have believed that they have supported me. And I think, from my experience, dealing with the different systems, the religious system and secular system or the legal system, the support, I can compare the support and the processes. So, and I think it would probably hold a bit of weight to those particular elders, Dino, Kevin, Ron, Vincent O'Toole and the Watchtower Society, that their processes aren't processes. There are no processes. There's no protection at all. And the way that they dealt with is very, very traumatic and very difficult to do. And on the other hand, the people that were supposed to be worldly and scary were complete strangers to me, particularly the first detective that I spoke to, Natalie Bennett. And even the people here at the Royal Commission, the team here, they're complete strangers, and I have had more support, acknowledgement and acceptance from complete strangers than I have ever had from anyone in the congregation.
And when you talked about the officer, Natalie Bennett, the officer that was the officer in charge of your case against your father, or the case against your father, I should say. Now, you had a good relationship with her? You trusted her?
Yes.
And initially initially it was a case that you were reluctant to talk to other police, is that?
Oh, yes. I was very nervous making that phone call, very, very scared because of obviously not bringing a reproach on Jehovah's name. And that I initially spoke to a male, and I said to him, can I please speak to a female? And her voice was very caring, non-judgmental, supportive, and she actually reminded me of one of the two people that I was not allowed to speak with in the Mariba congregation. And I remember that she said to me, oh, look, can you do a statement at the place where I live? And I said, she said, you just have to go in and do, and I said, oh, no, I'm not doing it unless I speak to her. So she flew all the way up from where she was and took my statement.
And you just mentioned that she reminded you of two people in the congregation that you
One of two, yeah.
One of two people that you weren't allowed to speak with. Can you explain to the Commission what you mean by that?
My father had specific people that he would not allow me to talk to, even within the Jehovah's Witnesses. Am I allowed to say this person's name?
Probably doesn't. I don't think it matters. Perhaps not to say it.
No. Anyway,
up to you. Sorry.
You could write it down if you want.
Oh, okay. And she was kind to me. She wasn't mean like all of the other women in the congregation, people, males, whatever. And she seemed to have a empathy for me, and a little bit of protectiveness, I think, in Yeah, and I think that's why my father didn't allow me to speak to her.
Were you ever offered any sort of support person during the committee process other than to have your mother involved at one stage?
No, my mother wasn't in the committee meetings. She was only allowed in one. No.
Did you ever indicate to anyone that you would like as some person that you trusted there?
I didn't even know I was allowed to do that.
Were you ever given any biblical guidance from the scriptures about how a person who has experienced sex abuse might deal with it?
Apart from putting my tears in a bottle, in that letter.
And when the letter that you're referring to, that is the letter from that's the letter from the Watchtower and Tract Society.
Yes.
To you in response to your letter in 1995. So that was in early 1996.
Yes. There were no talks or talks given from the platform, and normally something, if it was important, it would have been given in not just in the magazine articles. It would be given as a talk to the congregation.
So if there was an issue in the congregation, that would be the subject of a talk at Kingdom Hall.
Yes.
Right. And so a matter of topic would be put up there. And you've experienced a period of vilification. I think you've said after the committee meetings, you felt that people mistrusted you. Sorry, I'll withdraw that. That had said that you had been a liar.
Yes, that's correct.
Was there ever any talks from Kingdom Hall about encouraging the congregation not to speak ill of people who might have made such accusations?
No.
Was there any support given to you at all about your own feelings of shame?
No.
Excuse me. You've said in your statement and to a counsel assisting that the legal process was a much better one for you. How did it make you feel as a result of that final outcome, obtaining an outcome through the court process?
I'd like to let all the victims know that are listening to this and the elders that by going to the police and speaking to Natalie Bennett, and it was the very first time that somebody actually thought that what he did, my father did, was wrong, and he needed to answer for that. I didn't even really know that it was a crime. I mean, and just that acknowledgement and knowing that the court process had rules of evidence and rules. He couldn't just come up and say what he wanted, and he couldn't threaten me. And I felt protected, and I felt supported because they provided counsellors before and after, and they looked after me. And even to this day, I still stay in contact with Ronald Swanwick, which was the DPP at that stage, and the investigator, police investigator Natalie Bennett. So, yeah, I still, when you compare that.
And you would agree, nevertheless, that 3 trials was nevertheless a fairly gruelling process of itself, having to give evidence at 3 trials and be cross-examined was of itself a difficult process.
Yeah, it was difficult, but nowhere near as traumatic as what the elders put me through, and the vilification of the congregation in Mareeba. Nowhere near it.
And you've mentioned previously a recommendation about what outcomes you would like to see from this commission. Is there anything further that you would like to see? Like I think you mentioned that you advocate that people obviously go through a legal process, that they go to a police. Is there any other recommendations that you would like to see or changes that you think would assist if a young Jehovah's Witness child was abused, what would assist to ensure that their voice was heard?
I feel that if the mandatory reporting laws were introduced across Australia, given the nature of the Jehovah's Witness organisation and the way they work with their vilification practices, I feel that they could still act in the same way. So from that perspective, I think it is really essential that they need to be financially accountable and also criminally if they don't protect the children in the congregation.
And what about information within the congregation to ensure that that other children are not exposed to a person who may commit a sexual abuse offence?
The practice of reinstating them into the congregation after they said sorry or they appear to be repentant isn't enough. The pedophiles generally reoffend, as in the case of my father, like couldn't control himself with just one daughter, had to assault all of us. I think there needs to be a database, and I honestly believe that once they've offended in the congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses and even externally, that well, particularly in the congregation, because it's like a family network, everybody's trusted, and they don't disclose to other people in the congregation. In fact, if I could just say this, you know, from time to time, witnesses will come and knock on my door, and I normally sort of say, you know, I'm not interested. And one occasion, last year actually, there was a lady that came to my door, and she had a son with her, and I felt compelled to tell her to be careful of people in the congregations, particularly those ones that appear to be really righteous. And she was grateful that I said that to her. I said and then I explained that I was no longer practicing Jehovah's Witness, and she knew of what had happened to me. She knew who I was. She knew all the details. She was asking me questions. So I think the confidentiality, even, like, the elders speak about their confidentiality and they can't disclose anything to the police or whatever, but all of my details are out there. I've disclosed they protect the accuser in that sense. And my details are out there. Everybody knows what's happened. They've breached my confidentiality.
And did you feel protected at all by the Jehovah's Witnesses?
Definitely not.
Thank you.
BCG, in paragraph 69 of your statement, you mentioned that the elders who presided over the committee and the appeal meeting gave evidence at the committal and at voir dire during the first trial. Did they give evidence, to your knowledge, in the latter 2 trials?
I don't recall that they did, and I was really quite upset about that because I'd done the right thing and I spoke up straight away while it was fresh in my memory, and I believe they even took notes and details in the meetings, and I thought for sure they'll be able to corroborate that that this happened, instead of me coming back so many years later and all of a sudden out of the blue I've remembered some abuse that's happened. I've said it I've spoken about my father's abuse ever since it's happened, every chance I've gotten. So I was very disappointed that they didn't give evidence.
When they gave evidence at the committal, were they called by the Crown, by the prosecution, or by your father's defence team? Do you remember?
They were called by the DP, yeah, Belinda Merrin, yes. Yes.
Right. Yes. Yes. Mr. Stewart.
I have nothing arising now.
Thank you, BCG. Thank you for coming and telling us your story.
Thank you.
You're now formally excused.
Thank you.
The next witness, Your Honour, is Mr. Dino Ali.
So, Dino.
Ali, A-L-I. Yeah, tab 2 of the statements bundle.
It's necessary for you to be sworn to give your evidence. Would you take an oath on the Bible or an affirmation?
I'll take an oath on the Bible.
There's a Bible there. Would you take it in your hand, please? And repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give in this Royal Commission
that the evidence I shall give in this Royal Commission
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Yes, thank you. Take a seat, please.
Thank you. Sir, will you state your full names for the record, please?
Dino Ali.
Mr. Ali, when did you become a Jehovah's Witness?
I was baptised in September of 1981.
And how old were you then?
32.
And you served 2 periods as an elder in the Mariba congregation, is that right?
That's correct.
The first was from 1986 to 1997.
Yes, as close as I can recall, yes.
And then you served again from 2006 to 2015.
Yes,
So are you currently an elder in that congregation?
I am.
And when you ceased being an elder in 1997 or thereabouts, what were the circumstances that caused you to cease being an elder?
Personal reasons.
By which do you mean you voluntarily resigned or you were removed?
I voluntarily resigned.
Now, in your statement, you say congregation members do not associate with disfellowshipped persons. What does that mean in a practical sense?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch the first part.
In your statement, you say that someone who has been disfellowshipped, let me put it the other way around, congregation members do not associate with someone who's been disfellowshipped. What does that mean in a practical sense? In what way do they not associate with a disfellowshipped person?
Well, if it's someone who's not in the family, not living under the same roof. If someone is disfellowshipped, that means simply that a person would not have any more relationship generally with that person who is disfellowshipped.
So no social interaction.
Correct.
And if it's a member of the family in the same house?
If the member is still living under that roof, then some precautions are taken as to how far that will go, but if it's a minor, they'll continue to care for the needs of that person and continue to provide whatever services that is required as a parent, for example, to a younger child or children.
And if a disfellowshipped family member is not living under the same roof, does the usual rule of not associating with them apply?
No, there is a cut-off rule, or not quite a rule, but the principle, a scriptural principle that does quote that we should not even eat with a person like that, which means that we don't fellowship to the same extent as we did in the past. There would be a removal, if you like, for that time that the person is in that state, that wouldn't belong to that family in the same condition as they were beforehand.
And that would last until such time as they were reinstated, if ever?
Correct.
You also say in your statement that members of the congregation have a personal responsibility to report wrongdoing to elders if they become aware of it and the wrongdoer does not come forward. How serious does that wrongdoing have to be that requires a member to report it to an elder?
Well, there are sins that the Bible mentions, like porneia, which involves immoral activities, stealing, which is goes beyond the point of a one-off, but it's a practice. So something that is willfully done in accordance with what the Bible says crosses the line, then we would, of course, take action against that.
Yes, well, I'd understand that may lead to disfellowshipping, but I'm really addressing an earlier phase. I'm addressing the question as how serious does a wrongdoing have to be in order that a member of the congregation has a responsibility to report it to an elder?
Well, across those lines, those principles, like, for example, in this case, if a person has, in the sense of porneia, have molested a young one in the family or someone outside the family.
What about, for example, being unchaperoned with someone of the opposite sex to whom one is not married?
Yes, there would be some. No, that is not. To define that, though, when exactly at what stage is that unchaperoning?
Well, I'm really asking you, at what stage would it have to be before a congregation member would be obliged to report it?
I don't think unchaperoning is as serious as what has been discussed here today, but if a person is aware of a situation of being unchaperoned, it's for their protection, of course, to report that as soon as someone may observe that. And particularly if it was someone within the family, of course, it would be appropriate to let the parents or whoever that is close to know that.
So teenagers kissing in the park, for example, that's something that, if observed, should be reported.
Teenagers, one has to be careful about being unchaperoned if it's one of the opposite sex, yes, because we want to try and protect children from doing something that may bring some harm to them.
Now, in your statement, you also say that reporting to the police is a personal decision for a victim and his or her parents if a minor. Is it a personal decision for an elder as to whether to report to the police something that's been reported to the elder which might constitute a crime?
Is it the elder's responsibility to do that? Is that what you're asking?
Is it the elder's personal decision as to whether to report information received by the elder that would amount to a crime?
No, it's not the elder's decision. We respect the right of the person who has been who has been a victim. We reserve her the right, or his right, to do that. But we will do everything we can to support it.
If a different crime, to take the most extreme murder, if you were told that a member of the congregation had killed someone else, would you report that to the police?
We would encourage the person to do that.
Would you do it yourself?
No, I would try very hard not to. Not that I would try very hard not to, but I would encourage the person continually to do that. That's a decision that they need to make.
Well, what if the person wasn't prepared to go to the police, but they told you that they saw the killing happen? What would you do?
Am I being asked on the present day circumstances?
Yeah.
Yes, I would take the action of ringing the branch and getting some legal advice on that.
Do you have any knowledge? You're living in Queensland, aren't you?
Yes.
Do you have any knowledge of the law or legal obligations to report knowledge of crimes at all?
Not really. No.
Yeah.
Do you know of any case, Mr. Ally, in which an elder has reported a criminal matter to the police?
No, I can't say that I have. No.
In your statement, you say you're only aware of one other case of child sexual abuse, and that was in the late 1980s. You're going to be shown a name in a moment, and I want to ask whether it's the case concerning that person.
Yes, I've heard of that.
Well, is that the one you're referring to in your statement? You look at 4.4 of your statement, the next page, I think.
No, that wasn't the one I was thinking of.
Giving you the wrong reference there. 4.1. I'm showing you a second name. If we can refer to the first name as the first name and the second name as the second name. Is that the one you had in mind?
That's the one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, would you just explain that case very briefly without mentioning many names as to what it entailed?
Well, it's very vague in the sense of all the details, because we were just simply informed that this certain individual had taken those steps of touching young children, and from there the process would be that then the elder would form a judicial committee to deal with
stop you for a moment. Did that information come to you as an elder?
No, it came. Yes, I was an elder at that time.
And then did you deal with it personally as an elder, or are you referring to it having been dealt with by others?
I didn't understand that one.
You deal with it personally yourself?
No, I didn't.
And did other elders within your congregation, did they deal with it?
Yeah, they certainly did, yes.
And the first name that you were given, that seems to ring some bell of memory for you. Is that a case you dealt with yourself personally?
Well, probably the one that affected me more would be the present case that is under discussion.
Well, I understand that the present case may have affected you more, but my question is different. It is, did you deal personally with the first case?
Not personally, no.
And were either of those cases, to your knowledge, reported to the police?
To my knowledge, no, they weren't.
Now, dealing then with the present case, you say in your statement that BCG moved into the Bardich home for a while after she had made the allegations about her father. She says she moved first into Kerry and Mark Gregor's home and only later for a short while to the Bardich home. Do you accept that?
It's vague, but I do know that the Bowdages, where that fitted in with the Grigor, I'm not sure, but I do know there was another family, the Belchers, that were living close by to the victim and the father. I believe that they also were involved, but at what stage? But I do know that both those families, Belchers and the Bowdages, had given refuge to BCG.
Yes. Mr. Ally, the question I'm asking is just quite a simple one, and so I'd ask you to try and answer the question. Do you accept that what BCG says is correct as to the order? She was first with the Gregors and after that for a short time with the Bardiches. Do you accept that?
I accept that. Yeah.
Perhaps we can have BCG's statement at paragraph 33 on the screen. Page 0008. You'll see in those two paragraphs, 33 and 34, BCG talks about her father being a violent man and refers to a particular incident. Did you know her father to be a violent man and to beat his children?
No, I'm not. I wasn't aware of that. No.
What, in your understanding, is the scriptural teaching of the Jehovah's Witness Church with regard to corporal punishment of children by their parents?
They're allowed to discipline to the degree that's necessary without crossing the line into abuse, physical abuse or any other type of abuse.
And what guidance is given as to where that line is?
We have many magazines that help, and books that helps parents to appreciate their responsibility in that regard, that they just do any discipline in a loving way, to always do that, not in anger, and continue to train the children so that they understand the principles that will help them in later life as well as in growing up as a children.
Mr. Ally, did you see or listen to BCG give her evidence earlier today?
No.
Did you not hear what she had to say?
No.
Have you been provided with a copy of her statement?
No.
You haven't read her statement?
On today, you're talking about?
Well, her statement for this hearing, a statement which is dated the 10th of July, but which she read in this hearing earlier today.
Not a statement, no. I haven't read her statement.
In that case, can we
There was just a few thoughts I think that I have been privy to, but that's about it.
What do you mean by a few thoughts?
I think that they came up in the sense that I told, I think they're in my statement, weren't they, where I told my brother Zinni, or she told my brother Zinni that she had a black eye, and his response to that.
Well, your statement is dated the 10th of July 2015. That's right?
Yes.
And BCG's statement is dated the 10th of July 2015.
Okay.
I take it you did not have BCG's statement available to you at the time that you prepared your statement, is that right?
No. Right. No.
So subsequent to the 10th of July 2015 have you had the opportunity to read BCG's statement?
I have been handed something that I think is her statement, but only in certain portions.
You mean some particular aspects of it have been drawn out and brought to your attention, and you've been told these are things that she says?
Yes,
Is that right?
yes.
And one of them is this incident at paragraph 34 that's on the screen before you concerning your brother, is that right?
Yes, that's the one about her eye. I think he...
And did,
Not the one about the belt, but the eye. I understood it was a black eye or something along those lines.
well, that's what she says. She said she had a black eye at the Kingdom Hall, and one of the elders, Zini Ali, that's your brother, is that right?
That's correct.
Asked her, what happened to your eye? And she replied, my father kicked the bedroom door in my face. And she says that Zini just laughed in response and said, oh, did he? And she says that she felt that Zini was dismissing what I had told him, as I thought it was a joke. Did you know about that incident at the time?
No. I
Yeah.
can't recall that, no.
And if we go to paragraph 38, is this another paragraph that was brought to your attention?
I don't recall that.
Well, what don't you recall? You don't recall it being brought to your attention, this paragraph?
That's right.
Yes.
In the context and what BCG is saying there, I don't recall that phone call or that she brought that to my attention. I'm sorry.
Mr. Ali, let me just deal with two things separately. The first thing is this paragraph, or what is stated in this paragraph, is that one of the matters that in the last week or two was brought to your attention as being something that BCG says?
No.
So you haven't seen this before?
No.
The first time you've ever seen this, that BCG says what's written in paragraph 38 is now while you sit in the witness box, is that right?
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
And you say you don't recall her phoning you and saying that she has matters to talk to you about things in her family?
No, I don't recall any of that whatsoever. No.
That's the sort of thing that an elder would handle, wouldn't it? If someone had something close to their heart and was troubling them, they would contact an elder to discuss it. Is that right?
I agree, yes.
And would it be the usual response to, if what they were raising was to do with their father, to say that they should raise it with their father first, if it was a minor?
I wouldn't have said that if that was the case. If it was as serious as that, that would be my response.
Well, if it was as serious as what?
If that what is being said here, what father had been doing to her in that sense.
Well, just read the paragraph, Mr. Ali. It doesn't say what her father had been doing. She said to you, I want to talk to you about things in my family that you don't know about, what my father is doing. Now, she doesn't say what it is that he's doing.
Yeah, well, I can't remember that conversation, I'm sorry.
And the way in which the church views things, the father is the head of the family, is that right?
Yes.
And would it be right that in the ordinary course a child who might have complaints about something in the family should raise it first with their father?
If we're talking generally in the sense that a person or a young child has been disciplined and it may be responding in this way perhaps, but I may say you need to speak to your father or provide the help of talking to the father to correct the situation if a certain discipline has gone too far.
Well, in a case where it's not made apparent what the issue is, it's just that she says, I've got something I want to tell you about what's going on in my family, things my father is doing, you don't know what it is, would that be the kind of case where you would say, well, raise it first with your father?
Well, there's possibly not enough information for me to comment on that. I don't recall that conversation. If it occurred, I'm not denying that she did.
Just Mr. Charlie, you're being asked something else. You're being asked a hypothetical question. Assume that you were told what she says she told you. What's your response?
If I were to assume that that's what she told me, what you're asking, what would my reaction be?
Yes.
If she needed help, if it was in that situation, I would provide the help. I would talk to the father.
Well, there's a couple of steps there. She says that she said she wanted to talk to you. Now, if a young female member of the congregation says she wants to talk to you about things in my family, would you talk to her?
Yes, I
Would you
would.
require her to talk to her father first if she said she wanted to talk to you about what her father was doing?
No. She would be quite welcome to express whatever her concerns were.
So just to be clear, if we, the Commissioner and I, accept that she said these things to you, that she wanted to talk to you, and you didn't talk to her, then you didn't do what you should have done. Is that right?
That would be true, yes.
Well, you need an opportunity to reflect, but she says she said this to you.
I'm not denying that what she's saying. I'm simply saying that I don't remember this happening.
Well, she says that having raised the question with you, you said, no, you have to talk to your father first. Do you see that?
Yes, I see that.
Well, you have no recollection of that either.
No, I don't have a recollection.
If we accept her evidence, it means that you have not spoken with her when in response to her request, doesn't it?
I don't see it that way, Your Honour.
Well, she says she wants to talk to you and you say no. You have to talk to your father first.
Well, I don't have a recollection of her saying that, and I'm not saying that I'm denying that that's something that she may have assumed that I said or that she said. It's just that I have no recollection to comment on that.
But if we accept that you had this conversation, then you declined to speak with her. Isn't that right?
No, I don't think that would be correct to say that either.
Well, what does the word no mean?
No. Well, when I say no, if I wouldn't have said no to talk to her. That's what I don't recollect having said anything. I don't recollect that BCG with this conversation. So,
did you talk to her about problems with her father?
I can't recollect that I did.
Something you would recollect, isn't it?
Well, one would hope so, and I wish I could, because I understand the gravity of what she was going through as we continue to look into that. And I appreciate the situation afterwards more so, and in retrospect, it's things that there are certain things that stick more often in memory than others. And to me, it was her going through that situation, very serious situation, and explaining herself afterward during the judicial case that I got to appreciate the depth of her concern.
You mean it was only when the matter went to court that you understood the serious nature of the events that had happened?
No, it was well before that. It was when the motions we started to go through, when it became something that was clearly a real victimisation of a young person by her parent, that all of us elders then acted very swiftly in dealing with that situation. Now, this may have been a prelude to that. I don't know. I cannot recollect this particular discussion. But
Well,
the other things...
We'll come to what you did do in response to what you knew, but is it right to understand that the teaching of your church requires someone who has a disagreement with another member of the congregation to first of all seek to put matters right with that other person?
That would be the first step.
So what BCG says in her statement about her conversation with you and your response is consistent with the teaching of the church. Is that right?
It should be, yes. But
it's the response that she says you made, as I understand it, from what you've told me, is consistent with the teachings of the church. That is, no, you have to talk to your father first.
Again, well, Your Honour, I'm sorry, but I can't recollect that.
No, come back. What she says you said, as I understand it, is consistent with the teachings of the church. That is, you've got to speak to your father first.
Generally, if it was something of a minor concern, yes.
Well, you don't know from this conversation whether it's major or minor. So do I then understand that what you're saying to us is that what she reports you as having said is consistent with the teachings of the church?
I would have to think very carefully on that whole aspect, because if I could remember the rest of a conversation that one might have, then perhaps I can comment, but I cannot recall
I'm sorry,
this having happened.
I'll have to put it to you again. We're just looking at the conversation that she says occurred. Now, you may not remember it, but that's what she says happened. What I want to know is whether that conversation, as she records it from you, is consistent with the teachings of the church, and that is, no, you've got to talk to your father first.
If this did really happen, I'm not doubting that it did, then it would be consistent with myself to follow through and have a discussion with her, and to also approach the parent if it was of something of concern, yes.
I'm lost. She says you said, no, you have to talk to your father first. Now, as I understand it from what you've already told me, a statement such as that by you is consistent with the teachings of the church.
It would be, yes, definitely.
Now, do you recall, Mr. Ally, how you first became aware of allegations being made by BCG that her father had sexually assaulted her?
I thought it was through another elder who brought it to our attention that these things had come to our attention, so we needed to act on that.
And who was that other elder?
I believe it may have been Kevin.
Well, do you remember who it was?
Not offhand.
Is it not the case that these allegations were brought to your attention by someone else in the congregation who was a friend of BCG, who has a pseudonym in these proceedings, BCJ? There should be a list in front of you which will give you who BCJ is. Was it not that person, without saying his name? Was it not him who raised these matters with you?
Possibly it could have been.
It may have been.
Possibly.
And then you would, if it was, you would then have raised that with the other elders, is that right?
Yes.
And sitting there now, do you recall what it is that was said to you as to what BCG's allegations were?
As a judicial beforehand, which, in what context?
Well, when they were first brought to your attention.
Right.
When it was first brought to your attention through as BCG says, BCJ, and you say, could it be? When they were first brought to your attention, do you recall what it was that was said that BCG was saying? In other words, what was the complaint? Do you remember that?
That she had been abused sexually, molested.
At that stage, in other words, what was first reported to you, were details beyond that she had been abused sexually given to you?
Not to me personally. That would have come through another elder informing the body of elders that such and such had happened, and then the action would be taken.
All right. Now, addressing then when you were informed what the allegations were in some detail, what were you informed as to what they were?
That her father had abused her, sexually abused her for some time.
Do you recall whether it was said what the nature of that abuse was?
It was on a sexual level.
You've said that already.
Yeah.
Was any more detail as to the nature of the abuse conveyed to you at that time?
That had been carried on for a while. If I recall, this may have come through after we had or were dealing with her father on another issue, that this particular charge came up. But at the moment, no, I can't recall what else would have come up.
But at least that her father had abused her sexually for some time.
Correct.
Now, in the part of your statement where you deal with generally what is supposed to happen when allegations of child sexual abuse are brought to the elders' attention, you say that the elders are immediately to call the branch office on receiving the allegation. Did that occur on this occasion?
No. That instruction came through, I think, a little bit later. As I recall, during that time that we dealt with this particular case, that wasn't something that I don't think was in the instruction about how to deal with that. The elders followed through by dealing with it promptly, though.
Right, so at that time, we're talking about approximately the middle of 1989. To your recollection, at that time, there was no standing instruction that the elders must immediately contact the branch for direction in the case of child
Not at
sexual
that
abuse.
time, no. No, that's my understanding.
Now, you've said that these allegations came to the attention of the elders. That's the three of you, as I understand it. That's you, Mr. Allied, also Mr. Bowditch and Mr. DeRoy. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, can you explain what did the three of you do with regard to those allegations?
We immediately followed through by just asking questions in a closed environment.
Asking questions of each other, Mr. Ally? Or asking questions of whom?
Of the perpetrator and of the victim herself, because we sat down and we wanted to understand exactly what had happened and her version of what the tragic circumstances were that she had faced. So I remember that she was a very brave person for her age to be able to do that. And that's something that stands out in my mind, and to explain some of those horrible things that had happened to her. So we sat together three elders and herself. There was nobody else within that environment, and we allowed her to tell us, we allowed her time to do that. We didn't want to rush. We wanted her to tell us and explain to the extent that she could, what had happened.
And as I understand it, you asked her questions, is that right?
Only to fully understand the situation, certain situations.
And did you meet with her a number of times in that way?
I believe we did, yes.
And did you meet separately with her father?
We met with the father? Yes, yes.
Also a number of times?
A number of times.
And he denied the abuse, is that right?
Every time.
Yeah. And when you met again then with BCG, did you convey to her father's denial?
That's right. Yeah, we informed her of that. Yeah.
And did you then seek further information or clarification from her about her allegations?
Yes, to the extent that she was able to. If there was more that she wanted to add, because it takes, I found that it took a lot more than one sit-in to understand, and for her also to tell us what she'd been through.
And at that time she was about 18, is that right?
I think so, yes.
And you were about 39, is that right? Or 40?
Something like that.
And Mr. Bardich and Mr. DeRoy, are they older than you?
No, I think Kevin is about a year or so younger, and Ron is a few years younger again.
And in those meetings that you had with BCG that you've described, did you offer to her the possibility of having someone to sit with her in support of her, someone of her choosing?
No. No, not while we were in a closed session. This was kept private first so that she could explain. It was an environment, I believed, because being a father myself and having I had 5 children, of dealing with her on a basis of that and allowing her the opportunity to say what she needed to say without any influence from anybody outside.
Mr. Ali, how many men were present at this meeting?
At that judicial committee?
No, at the initial meeting.
That would be the judicial committee.
How many were present?
3.
And only BCG?
Yes.
Did it ever occur to you that given the requirement to speak to 3 men about intimate detail in relation to her father's accusations was an entirely inappropriate task to put upon her on her own?
No, not in that time, because it wasn't that she was alone. Even though we had a closed session in a room, immediately beyond the door was her fiancé, who was providing support. So we could break at any time if she felt that, look, I needed to. So recalling our sessions with her, though it was difficult to go through those, recounting that, she did rather well. I must admit, and I'm very proud of the way in which she did it. I really felt for her.
Well, you speak in those terms, but the fact of the matter is the 3 of you came to the view that there wasn't clear proof of her abuse, didn't you?
Not true. If I may just clarify that, Your Honour.
I'm just looking at your own words.
Yes, to explain that. we didn't disbelieve what had happened. We believed her. But when you have to deal with how many know of this or are aware of it, that is a different matter. If you've got two witnesses to something, or if the perpetrator had confessed to doing that, that would be sufficient. So we all three of us, believed what she was saying.
Well, then why didn't you just say so?
I believe we would have. We didn't never discount that didn't happen.
Why didn't you just say, we do accept her account, we don't accept the father's, and we act upon her account? Why didn't you do that?
Well, we have to go through the process first of letting her explain what she wanted to tell us. Then we had to follow through, because the direction is that we also need to talk to the other person and find out from your side of things what happened and why. And we needed to delve into that to get the full story of what was going on.
So much is plain, but after you'd got the full story, do you say you didn't believe her?
No.
You did.
We did believe her.
But you didn't act on that belief, did you?
Well, we couldn't, because there was only that one person who was aware or knew that happened. We did not have another person to corroborate, if you like, so that we could then deal with that situation in a way that our Bible principles allowed us to do.
You do appreciate that in most cases of sexual assault, there will only be the complainant and the alleged assaulter who are witnesses to the event. You understand that?
I am starting to, even more so now, because we have received many updates with what we can do. But at that time, this is what we believe to be the best under those circumstances.
Do you believe it now to be the best situation?
I admit that looking back, there could have been different things could have been done differently that maybe would have brought closure in some ways, yeah. I agree.
What should have been done differently?
Well, if we knew...
Should you have acted upon your belief that she had been assaulted, as she said?
If we knew then what we know now, yes.
What do you mean by that?
Well, if we had the evidence before us, because it's difficult to follow through with something when there is only a one-on-one. He said, she said. We're not doubting that what happened to her is true. But for us to act as shepherds, or even if we call ourselves judges in that case, on the principles of God's word, we still need what God himself has outlined, that even in any sin, serious sin, there must be two witnesses to that. So we're sorry on it, but we can't ignore divine law.
Well, the courts were quite happy, ultimately, to convict the father, correct? Correct. On the evidence of BCG.
And another person.
Who was a witness to the event?
A same thing happened to another in the same way, yes.
So that's accepted as corroboration?
It did. But it also got him convicted.
If there hadn't been such a person, you say you could never have reached a conclusion that BCG had been assaulted by her father?
We didn't disbelieve that it happened, but to prove it to the extent that's required by divine law, we still needed the two witnesses, or a confession would be enough to do that.
Is that the position today?
It is, but added to that is the updates received that we are guided even more so since that time, 26 years, by other things now that we can follow up with, as has been brought up here, to take that further through the legal action, which I'm glad that has come through, because it helps us as elders then to deal a lot better, and something that we can really give more help to victims of this type.
I'm sorry, I don't understand what that's all about? What's come through in later updates?
Well, the fact is that our branch now can advise what are the things that we can take, steps that we can take in a legal sense, so that we can follow through.
What do you mean?
Well, I haven't been through that, but I've been aware of the fact that now the branch has allowed us the opportunity that we have a legal department that immediately, as soon as any complaint or a sexual assault of any nature, a serious one, is made, we immediately ring the branch, asking then for the help in a legal sense. What can we do to support the victim? And we got better guidance today than we did back then.
You speak then in terms of the victim, supporting the victim. Do you mean after you've determined that the person was assaulted, or when does the person become a victim?
Well, we believe that what they say initially, but we need also to follow through in proving that we can do something with that. We would love to do something with that. And in BCG's case, we wish we had, or we could have done more. But at that time, we did not have the means to, and the help to understand as we do today, because there's been so much printed out now of the helps that can be given to victims of this sort too. And we would like to very much to have followed through with that, but we can do so today because we're aware of them now.
Do you appreciate that the criminal law doesn't require cooperation before convicting someone of sexual assault?
No, I'm still learning, Your Honour.
Yeah.
When you say you get legal direction from the branch, you mean legal in the sense of within the church's law?
We do have lawyers who are involved in law, I believe, within the branch who are qualified to do that.
Yes, so they will guide you as to what you should do within the church's rules.
And taking in, I believe, what is required by the community.
Yes,
or the
and
law.
they will tell you if there's a legal obligation to report to the police or some other authority. They'll tell you that as well.
Possibly. I have not been through that, but I believe that it's quite possible. And it's ever changing.
The position is still that the two-witness rule is applied, isn't it? You're required to apply the two-witness rule.
Generally, yes. Yes, we do. And
Well,
as I explained too, that there is also the confession. If a person during our times in dealing with a particular matter, that the person admits what he has done, then we don't need two witnesses.
Yes, but if there's no confession, then you do require two witnesses. That's still the position.
We would do.
And in the light of the evidence you've already given over the last few minutes, what justification can you see for such a rule, for the two-witness rule? What justification is there for it?
Well, scripturally.
Or rationally?
Well, it is rational. Well, see, this, we believe rationally that divine law establishes, and it's a higher law in that respect, that from the time of Moses, for example, Deuteronomy, I believe, 19 verse 15, establishes that even the most serious sin requires not one witness, but two. And coming into the first century, that same law continued to apply. With that in mind, how can we ignore it?
Well, in the modern world where there's other forms of evidence that might be available, is there no space to revisit that rule, in your understanding?
That would be up to those who would see into that, yes. Who knows?
Mr. Ali, Mr. DeRoy, I think you say it?
DeRoy.
He was a member of your committee, wasn't he?
Yes.
Now, BCG says in her evidence that she raised with you allegations made by her younger sisters.
I can't recall that, I'm sorry.
And she says that you, that is the committee, through Mr. Roy, or DeRoy, said we won't talk to them because they're too young.
I'm not aware of that.
Well, this is what BCG says happened. And you don't remember.
No.
If it was true, then even in your terms, there was corroborative evidence being offered which you declined to accept or receive.
I'm not quite sure what that means. What do you mean?
Well, she was offering to you the account of her young sisters about being abused by their father. But if what she says is correct, through Mr. DeRoy, the committee said, we're not going to take the corroborative evidence that might be available.
I'm not aware of that, Your Honour. I'm sorry.
That's what it amounts to, isn't it? In other words, she says, the committee said, well, they're too young, therefore there won't be corroboration, and therefore the result will be we can't determine the proceedings in BCG's favour. Do you understand?
I understand what you're saying, yes.
Very well.
In your statement, you say that you appeared in court proceedings in Brisbane as a witness for the prosecution. Was that in the first trial or also in subsequent trials?
I think it was in the first.
And not in subsequent trials?
No.
And were you requested or required to give evidence in subsequent trials?
No.
And you referred earlier, you said that you thought that there was, in the criminal trial, there was a witness of another incident, similar incident or abuse, which is what enabled a conviction to be entered in that case.
In the subsequent trials?
Yes.
I believe so, yes.
Well, and that belief is gained from what? From where?
That person coming forward.
But where did you get your information?
Where did I get?
You say you believed someone else had come forward and given evidence in that trial about other abuse by the father.
Yeah.
Where did you get that belief from?
I don't want to mention names, but you have a BCK on the list.
Your statement is true and correct, Mr. Ali?
I do.
I send the statement, Your Honour.
I'll make it Exhibit 29-7.
Your Honour, would that be inappropriate?
10 o'clock in the morning. We'll adjourn.